Hey, this is Mike Robbins. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast. I hope you, your family, your team, everyone around you are doing well as we roll into 2025. So, today I actually want to talk about charting our course. Where are we headed? What are we up to? As I'm recording this, it's the first week in January, so we've just gotten through the holidays and all the New Year stuff. You may be listening or watching to this watching this right now, or maybe at another time much further in the future. But as you know, if you followed my work at all or listened to this podcast or read my articles and blog posts over the years, you know that I find the end of the year and the beginning of the year to be an incredibly sacred and important time. I have lots of rituals that I do about completing the year and creating the new year. I'll put some links in the show notes to previous articles and blog posts that I've written or podcasts that I've done about that. If you're interested or haven't, engaged in those rituals or practices before with me or others, maybe you have your own. But I just got home from speaking at a company kickoff event in Washington, D.C. yesterday for one of our clients. It was fun. I loved being there. I love kickoff events because it's the start of the year or the start of the quarter. I mean, sometimes if your company's on a fiscal year that starts, July 1st, or depending on the industry that you're in, in retail, the new year starts February 1st. So whenever that may be in the cycle of business, like over the years of speaking and working with lots of great companies, I've spoken at lots of company kickoff events and sales kickoff events and things like that. And I was thinking about this yesterday as I was at the event, and then this morning as I was out on a walk. And I think sometimes we think about, you know, our goals um, for our businesses, our companies, especially if we work for big companies and, we're part of an organization where we have to do budget and planning and goal setting and that kind of stuff, different than our own, personal goals, our own personal visions. And of course, they are different. Company revenue targets are very different than, personal goals and ambitions. But in some ways, even if, again, depending on what you do, and if you work for yourself or you a very small business or you work in education or you work for a nonprofit, again, the goal setting, sort of target setting process may vary a bit. But for the most part, even if it can be stressful or at times annoying or seem kind of obligatory in business, we don't tend to resist it all that much. It's just part of the deal, right? I mean, again, let's say you work for a big company and you're in sales, like looking at sales numbers for the whole company, the whole sales organization, the go-to-market team, or whatever it may be, looking at, your personal team. Maybe you're a sales manager and you manage a group of people. Maybe you're an individual salesperson and you have your own quota or target. Like looking at those numbers, part of the job, right? You got a number you're supposed to hit every month or every quarter or every year, and you either meet it or exceed it or fall short of it. And then the new year comes and you get a new target. If you're not in a sales oriented job and you work in HR or you work in finance or you work in marketing or other things where maybe it's a little harder to quantify the work, there still is some type of annual and at times quarterly planning process that goes on that we basically have to do it whether we want to or not. And then we're held accountable to it to the degree of which, there's some kind of meeting, there's some kind of performance review, there's something. Now, again, this isn't always enjoyable or inspiring necessarily. Believe me, I talk to lots of teams and lots of leaders and lots of organizations about this, but it's just kind of part of the deal. And we sort of accept it. And then some of us really like it. And depending on the role that you're in or the responsibility that you have, you might get really into it. Or again, if you're a senior leader, you're the CEO, you're the chief revenue officer, you're someone who's got to both come up with what those targets are and those goals and then share them with the group and the team and try to inspire people. That's both a burden, but also can be a real opportunity. But in our personal lives, I notice sometimes that can be a little bit different. And again, maybe you're like me and you love the year end, new year process and, sort of looking back and reflecting and completing the year and taking inventory of the wins and the challenges and looking at, how the goals and numbers shook out. Look, I always like them better when I meet or exceed the specific goals and the specific, key performance indicators for the business. It doesn't feel as good when I fall short, both with, business goals, but also personal goals. But that's also part of the process. And then I really love the setting the goal part or the charting the course of where am I headed? Where are we headed? What do we want to do? But maybe you love that process. Maybe you hate it. But in general, it can be challenging for most of us, for a variety of different reasons, right? I mean, one of the main reasons it's challenging is like we're busy. And, the beginning of the year is kind of an arbitrary, and again, it could be the beginning of the quarter, it could be the middle of the calendar year, which is the start of the fiscal year, whatever it is. It could be our birthday, it could be, the solstice, the spring equinox, whatever. I mean, people get into different dates on the calendar or different times of the year, but whatever it is, like sometimes it's also a big life event happens positively or negatively, and that has us puts us at a spot where it's like, whoa, I have to start over, right? A health challenge, a divorce, a job loss, a move, an empty nest, the loss of someone close to us. Those things, once we get through the shock and the grief of it, especially if it happens suddenly, there can be this sense of, I want to start over, I want to reinvent, I want to do something different. So this process of kind of charting our course can be tricky because it doesn't always happen at a convenient time. We don't always feel like it. We're not always in the mood. And for the most part, life for a lot of us is very full. There's a lot going on. So it's like, when do I really have time to stop and reflect and then chart my course? As I often say when I'm speaking at, both company kickoff events like the one yesterday or offsites or retreats or whatever, usually we don't have time to do those things, right? It doesn't fit into our daily busy schedule. But if we don't do it, we end up just sort of reacting to life, reacting to things as opposed to really creating or causing things, right? I mean, again, the end of the year, which we've just come through as I'm recording this, is often a time, it's busy with the holidays. I really love that week between Christmas and New Year's. I mean, I took the last couple of weeks off here from the show and from a lot of things because I do like to wind down, and once Christmas happens, which I do love and have always loved since I was a kid, and, now being a dad and there's all the parties and the presents and the things about it. But I really love once Christmas is over and as we roll through New Year's, because it tends to be kind of quiet for the most part. People go on trips and go away, and we usually stay home. But I really like that week because it's like a perfect time to reflect and really kind of go within. But again, here we are as I'm recording this in early January, and it's kind of like the new year starts, and we get to that first sort of Monday after New Year's, and it's like, go. And everyone's off to the races for the new year. And it takes a minute to kind of get back into the swing of things a lot of times. But this is the time of year, again, as I'm recording this, that we often are thinking about, okay, what is this year about for me? What do I want to create? What's the course that I want to be on personally? What's the course we want to be on as a team? What's the course the company wants to be on as a whole? And the truth is, we don't really know what's going to happen. That's another thing that makes it challenging. There's so much uncertainty in life. I mean, especially if we've learned nothing over the last 5 years. I was thinking about this as I was doing my reflecting on the past year and just remembering back to this same time 5 years ago. 2019 had ended, 2020 had started. I remember I had lots of goals. I had a new book coming out. We're All in This Together was coming out, was scheduled to come out that May. I just hired a new team member. We had just had some team meetings at the end of the year to kind of complete the year and really start to set the course for the new year. Lots of new projects, lots of exciting things going on. And I was ready for 2020 to be an awesome year for me personally, for the business. There was an election, a presidential election in the US that I figured was going to be pretty tense and tumultuous, which it ended up being. But of course, I had no idea, like you had no idea, like any of us had any idea that a global pandemic was going to take over the world and completely disrupt life as we know it. And, here we are several years later, and life is much more back to normal today than it was at that time, a little less than 5 years ago. But it had a huge impact. It still has an impact on me, on most of us. I think the way we work, the way we live, the way we think, the way we operate, what's happening in the country and the world. And so that's another thing that can make charting our course or setting our vision or even setting goals challenging, because we've all lived enough life to realize, I don't know what's going to happen. And what I often say, as I said yesterday, and I usually say when I'm at those kickoff events, is like, look, we don't know what's going to happen this year. There's no way we can have a crystal ball to know exactly where we're going to be at the end of this year. It's probably not going to be exactly what we think. It's going to be either better or worse than we're hoping right now, but it's going to be different. But the thing is that charting the course, having a plan, having a vision, having a goal of where we want to go isn't always about achieving that exactly. It's about setting us on that path, right? And we've all been disappointed in our lives. Another thing that can make it challenging for us to set goals or really speak to what our desires or our visions are, what our plans are, what we want to have happen. Because it can be heartbreaking, right? We have big goals, big dreams. We put ourselves out there, right? I mean, you know my story. Like, I wanted to pitch in the major leagues, and I played baseball for 18 of the first 25 years of my life, and I got hurt, and it didn't ultimately. I got to play in college, I got to play in the minor leagues, but I got hurt before I got to the major leagues. That was heartbreaking. That was devastating for me. You've probably had similar type goals in your life from when you were young to even now, right? We want to get married, we want to have babies. Maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't. Or we do get married and it doesn't work out. We want to, start on a path of a certain career and we do that for a while and then something happens. There's a disruption in the industry, right? I mean, gosh, everything going on with artificial intelligence right now, all the uncertainty around that, it's exciting, but it's scary, right? We get down a certain path and realize, I don't like this. I don't want to do this anymore, or this isn't working out for me. So we change, or something happens. So many things happen in our lives that impact the course. And because of that disappointment, because of that pain, because of that frustration, at times failure, we often say to ourselves, I'm not doing that anymore, right? It's why some of us don't even like making New Year's resolutions because it's like, what's the point? I'm not going to stick to it anyway. Again, so some negativity, some negative experience, some pain, some challenge, even some trauma from the past can get in our way. So suffice to say, it's actually challenging. It's fraught emotionally and even practically to chart our course. There's a few good friends of mine in my life right now who I've been talking to and sharing some of my goals for the new year with and asking them about theirs. And I've just been sitting with them and holding space and trying to encourage and coach a little bit, even though they don't necessarily always ask me for my coaching. But the process of setting the goals, because again, it's vulnerable to put it out there. This is what I want, because at some level, then we have to hold ourselves to account, or someone else might know, I want that. And if it doesn't happen, there's again the potential for that pain, that disappointment. So, all of that to say, it is challenging for a bunch of reasons for us personally. And again, when you think about it, though, at work, because it's kind of, we're told we have to some degree. A lot of times the goals, the targets, the budget is just given to us. And then we have to organize ourselves and our team around it to try to make that happen. Now, again, it might seem fair, it might seem unfair. We might have more or less to say about the process of creating what the goal is or what the targets are that we're going for. But in some level, again, that's just sort of the cost of doing business. That's the price of admission. That's what it takes to be part of a company is you sign up for and sign on to, I'm going to help make this happen. And the more senior you are in a leadership position, the more responsible you become for those goals, those targets. And even if we don't always love them or we feel pressured by them, we don't often resist doing them. I mean, imagine going into your boss and you say to the CEO of your company, you know what, this year, I don't want to have any goals. I don't want to have any targets. I'm just going to go with the flow because the last few years it's been really stressful and challenging. I don't feel like it. I don't think that's a good approach, right? Now, again, maybe you work in a really progressive company. Maybe the role that you have is, you can kind of get away with that. But for the most part, that would sort of be a no pass with most CEOs, with most companies. Even if you're not talking to the CEO, you go down several levels and just say to your boss, no goals, no targets, no, um, you know, no plan for me. I'm just going to show up at work every day and try to do a good job. Like that would not work. And we wouldn't even think to ask that because that's just part of the deal. But we do that for ourselves. And again, I'm not saying that you have to do your goals or have your, vision or have your, course charted in some specific way. You got to do it in a way that works for you. But here's the thing. You and I right now in this present moment, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, as you're listening to this or watching this, who we are in the present is given by the future that we're living into. Now, I know in a lot of ways, like the way conventional wisdom is, we think about I am who I am based on all my past experiences, everything I've learned, how I was raised, how I've been educated, my experiences, and that there is some truth to that, right? My past, your past, our past have a lot to do with who we are in the present moment. But in terms of if we can think about it in a different way, the future kind of pulls us, if you will. I mean, even in just a practical way. Like I'm recording this podcast right now at this specific time on this specific day because I have other things going on in my day, in my life. I have other meetings and things I have to get to. So therefore, I'm doing this right now. If I didn't have anything scheduled today, I may not do this, or I might do it later. You know what I mean? I mean, just something simple like that, like the Zoom meetings that you get on, the phone calls that you make, the activities. You set your alarm in the morning to get up because I have to do this, then I have to do this, then I have to do that. I have to drop my kid off at school. I have to, right? So the future does dictate a lot of what we do in the present moment, even how we feel. Another example of this is like, again, many of us may have just come back from being on a trip over the holidays. Again, if you're watching or listening to this as I'm recording it, but when you are about to go on a trip that you're excited about, that future is exciting. So you feel a certain way in the moment, even if you have a lot of work to do and a lot to catch up on, you're like motivated and excited because I'm living into that future of going to that place or being off or being with my family or my friends or people that I love. If you're going to go do something that you're scared about, maybe again, being with family and friends might be stressful. You might be dreading it. That future is going to impact you in the present moment. If you have a big meeting or a big, deadline or a big presentation, or, think about being back in school and a big test coming, or like, you know, a paper due, or, I think about this when I have something that I have to write, or even doing this podcast. I love doing this podcast. It excites me. And then sometimes, even this morning, there's a little bit of angst for me about, oh, what am I going to say? And how's it going to come out? And so, anyway, all of those things, that's about the future impacting the present. When we have a compelling future, when we have a compelling goal, a compelling vision, a compelling dream, something that we're excited about in the very short term and even in the much longer term, it orients us in the present moment. Right. I just flew to Washington, D.C. and back. I actually went out a day early because of the snowstorm. I had to organize myself to get on that plane and go on that trip. Right. I travel a decent amount with what I do. We do that all the time. Right. So, what are the goals that you have right now? What is the vision that you're living into right now? What's the course that you're on? Because that is going to have a lot to do with not only where you are in the present moment, but where you're oriented and even how you feel. And yeah, like past experiences that are painful and difficult and sad or even traumatic can have a significant impact on how we show up in the present, right? How we feel. And being excited about the future, being inspired about the future, or being scared about it or depressed about it or worried about it has a lot to do with, again, how we show up in the present moment and how we feel. So again, I'm not trying to sugarcoat this or Pollyanna it or anything. If we're unclear about where we're headed, if we're not excited about where we're headed, if what we've been through has been painful or challenging, it's going to be difficult. But there is something really powerful about charting our course consciously, deliberately, with some level of, realism. And again, it's a tricky balance. There's a lot of paradox in this. So what can we do? How do we chart our course in the most effective way possible? The first thing we got to do is tell the truth about where we are. Like what's so right now? What's happening? Again, if we're talking about a professional goal or a monetary goal, let's say you have a vision to be financially free, to be, financially wealthy and abundant. That's a great goal to have if that's something that inspires you. The first thing that we would do is take inventory of where are we right now? Can we get clear about what the financial situation is right now? Or you have a professional goal. I want to be at this level in my career. Okay, where are you right now? And there's both the reality of where you are, but then how do you feel about what's going on right now? Again, without a ton of judgment and shame and ridicule and being overly critical, but just take inventory of what's so right now. That's why it's so important, again, at the end of the year to really look back and reflect. What did we accomplish? What got produced? What didn't? Where did we fall short? So that we can really be honest about the ups and the downs and then where we are. So that's the first step. And sometimes that can be a hard and painful step. Sometimes that takes some time. We got to clean some stuff up. We got to look at things that maybe are challenging to look at. I was talking to a friend of mine last week and he was saying, I just sometimes, looking at the numbers gets so stressful. I feel bad. I don't want them to be what they are. And I'm like, hey, man, I totally get it. But if we don't do that, if we're not willing to look at the numbers, how can we change them? How can they grow? How can they be what we want them to be? As an example, again, with our health, can we take some inventory? And again, a lot of what I'm talking about is predicated on the idea that we have the ability to do some of these things. So there's a level of privilege in what I'm talking about. I get that. If we're in full on survival mode, this is very difficult, if not impossible. However, even if we find ourselves in a really difficult spot, even if we find ourselves in some proverbial, um, survival mode, which I've definitely been in it many times in my life, still telling the truth and taking inventory about where we are is important. And then maybe our visions or our goals or our ambitions, we often have to bring them down to the very simple, the very mundane, the very like, what am I going to do in the next moment? What am I going to do? Right. Michelle and I, my wife and I often have said when we've gone through crises and really difficult times, next right thing, next right thing, next right thing, next right thing. Like, let's just show up, be present, and do the next right thing. That may be all we can do. I remember, and I've shared this, I think, before on the show, being really depressed in college, like scarily depressed. First time I'd really dealt with, clinical depression. And, my dad had bipolar disorder and a lot of mental illness in my family. So I was aware of depression. I was aware of mental illness. But, it was 1995. I was 20 going on 21. People weren't talking about mental health in the same way we talk about it now. I was scared. I was in a lot of pain, but I had a lot of shame about it and a lot of embarrassment. And I also had that fear, oh my gosh, maybe I'll be like my dad. Maybe I'm bipolar and maybe I'm going to have to struggle with this for the rest of my life. So there was a lot going on for me. And as I was in the throes of it, it had been going on for a couple months. I remember, I was struggling to sleep and I got up in the middle of the night in my apartment, my junior year in college, and I went to the refrigerator. I was thirsty and I got some pink lemonade. Pink lemonade from concentrate that was in a little container in the kitchen in the refrigerator. And I poured myself a glass. I was trying to be quiet so I didn't wake up my roommate. And I'm drinking this pink lemonade. And I thought to myself, oh, this tastes good. And I know that might sound weird, but it was one of the first positive thoughts that I'd had in a very long time. And I remember thinking, ooh, that was cool. And then my goal became, could I have a positive thought the next day? Could I find a moment in the day where I just like didn't feel like everything was dark and bleak and the world was crashing in on me, which is often how it feels when we're in the throes of depression. So I say all of this again, we want to tell the truth about where we are. And if we are in a really dark place, if we are really struggling, can we reach out and ask for some help, some support? Maybe the thought of thinking about our vision or our goals or where we're headed or what we want is just too daunting and overwhelming. But let's just say, for the sake of this conversation, we're not in a super deep, dark place. And again, if we are, if you are, blessings to you, prayers to you. There are so many people around you who love you and can support you. But whatever place we're in, even if we're in a great place or we're somewhere in between, starting with telling the truth and taking inventory of where we are is essential. The second thing is to start to really allow ourselves to think about what we want. What do we desire? I mean, there's kind of what has to happen. I got to pay the bills. I got to take care of the kids. I got to, you know, of course there's that. But what do we want? And can we talk about both what's needed and what's wanted and really just let ourselves kind of be in that space of creation of what do I want? What would be fun? What would be inspiring? What would be exciting? And then there are things that we kind of have to do. And then there's things that we want to do. And again, in a perfect world, we get to do lots of things that we want to do, and that fulfills many things that we need to do. And, again, I live in the real world. I have a real life and a real family and a mortgage and all the things. So, but allowing ourselves, again, that's part of telling the truth, what's needed, what's necessary. Again, if we think about numbers and finances, it's like, how much money do I have to generate every month in order to live my life and pay my bills and not go into debt? I mean, that's a pretty basic adult conversation that we have to have with ourselves if we live alone, or with roommates or friends if we live with them, and or a spouse or a significant other or a family if we're, sharing space and resources in that way. But really letting ourselves speculate, what do I want? and just hang out in that. I did an episode a few months ago on desire and just how important but vulnerable desire can be. I know for me, it's like, ooh, I sometimes don't let myself really go into those desires because I immediately go into, well, how am I going to make that happen? Or I had all those desires before that didn't happen. So let me just be practical, be realistic. And again, nothing wrong with being practical and realistic, but do we let ourselves think? Do we let ourselves dream? That's the second step of the process. Thirdly, we want to start putting these things into reality. Okay, so I have these desires, I have these some big, some small, some somewhere in between, some that seem very attainable and doable, but just are going to take some work. Others that might seem like it's going to take an act of, a miracle for that to happen. Can we start to put them into reality? What would that look like? Can we break it down? Again, it's like, I want to make $1 million. Okay, great. I'm currently making $100,000. Okay, there's a gap. So if you really want to make $1 million, what would it take? What would that look like? How would you break that down in reality? So this is where the rubber starts to meet the road and it gets tricky, right? Now, look, I've said for years, there's intentions, which are kind of like visions, how we want to feel. My intention is to feel healthy, let's say. There's goals like I want to, have these certain numbers when I get blood tests done, or, stand on the scale and see these certain numbers, or talk to my doctor. Again, I'm talking about health, right? That would be a goal, like an outcome. And then there's actions. So intentions are like the vision where we want to go. The goals are some outcome result. And the actions are, what am I going to do on a daily basis? I'm going to, get up in the morning and meditate and do yoga, or go for a walk, or go for a run, or go to the gym, or jump on a rebounder, or do a chair workout or whatever. There's so many different things we can do physically. Again, to the financial thing, it's like, I want to feel abundant and confident and free. That would be the intention. The goal would be, again, $1 million or $500,000 or $100,000 or whatever the number is, the outcome. And then the daily actions might be, depending on what we do to generate income, it could be about outreaches and calls. It could be about projects and things and, clients, or, again, we have a job, there's a salary, maybe there's a bonus structure, maybe there's I can ask my boss for a raise or whatever. Again, I'm just sort of making stuff up, but you get what I'm saying, right? Intentions are how we want to feel, or what's the vision, what's the essence of what we're after. Goals are outcomes and results. Actions are practices. Actions are what I like to say are always 100% in our control. So did I go to the gym or not? Did I pick up the phone, or did I send the email? Did I write the, article, or whatever it is? Like, I either did or I didn't. Now, again, things have to line up in life, and I have to be well enough to do it and all the things, but ultimately it's not an outcome. An outcome is, I'm going to sell 58 widgets, and I don't know who's going to say yes to buying the widgets. I can make 1,000 calls and I only sell 20 widgets. You know what I mean? So we can't completely control the goals and the outcomes. We can take the actions and then focus on what's the vision, what's the intention. That's why it's important. The thing to remember, though, back to some of the challenges, we don't want to get too attached to the outcome. The reality is you're not going to accomplish all your goals. And if you do, they're probably not big enough. And even if you do, you're going to then make more goals. So it's not about the goal, it's about who we become in the process, and continuing to true ourselves up. Am I still interested in this? Is this still fun? Is this still rewarding? Am I still learning and growing and excited about this thing? And yeah, I have some responsibilities. I got to feed myself and my family, so I can't just jump from thing to thing to thing when I have a moment of this isn't fun anymore. But like, we've all experienced achieving goals, and we've all experienced not achieving goals. I personally like it better when I achieve them. It's more fun. But there's also a weird, not dark side to that, but there can often be an emptiness to that when we get the thing and then realize, oh, it wasn't the thing. It was really about me being able to appreciate myself and my life. So that's the final thing, is to really keep things in perspective, right? Like, yes, have some accountability, have some way to track what we're doing, have some way to check in with other humans, not just ourselves, about how it's going on a monthly, quarterly, annual process. So we don't just set the goals and then put them away and never look at them again. Because, not that there's no value in doing that, but the real value is truing ourselves up to them along the way so that we can stay on the course that we set, knowing full well that it's not going to be a straight line. It never is. So that goes to this final thing of keeping things in perspective. Here's the reality. Again, I'm recording this at the beginning of 2025. Whenever you're listening to this, If we fast forward to the beginning of 2026, let's just say, whatever goals you set today or this week or this last week about this new year, they're probably not all going to happen exactly the way you wanted them to. Maybe some will be way better than you thought. Maybe some will be way worse. Maybe some will be right on the nose, but it's going to be a twisty line along the way, as it always is. But that's where we get to just have some perspective and some faith and some trust and put our hands up on, the roller coaster, so to speak, and just enjoy the ride as best as we can. I heard Van Jones and Ariana Huffington have this conversation a few years ago, and they were talking about this metaphor of life being a train, that we're all on the train, right? And we all know where the train ultimately goes in our individual lives. Like our life is going to end at some point, our physical life, right? So it's like people get off the train at different times based on when their life ends. And out the window of the train, the weather keeps changing. Sometimes it's sunny and beautiful. Sometimes it's dark and dreary. Sometimes it's raining. Sometimes it's snowing. Sometimes it's overcast. Sometimes it's clear. Sometimes it's cloudy. Sometimes it's hot. Sometimes it's cold. It's all the different things. And our job in life is to appreciate all the changes of the weather, knowing that the destination is ultimately the same. But you and I get to chart our own individual courses based on our desires, based on our values, based on our goals, based on what matters to us. And we can change our mind along the way and have some fun. And again, yes, let's accomplish the things we want to accomplish. Let's go for big things. But it's like, you know, what's the saying? Shoot for the moon. You may not hit it, but you'll hit the stars. Look, a lot of cliches seem corny and cheesy, and we roll our eyes. They're cliches because there's truth to them. So, as you think about charting your own course, go for it. Remember to tell the truth about where you are, first step. Second step, hang out in the desire, in the dreaming. What do you really want? Let yourself really go there. Third step is to start to get more specific about it and put it into practice. What are my intentions? How do I want to feel? What are the actual goals and outcomes that I want? Am I willing and courageous enough to put that out there, knowing full well that I don't know if I'm going to accomplish it or not, but not putting it out there isn't going to help me accomplish it. It's just going to protect me from being disappointed. And then thinking about what are the actions that I can take on a daily basis that lead towards those goals? And how do I check in on it and have some accountability so I see how I'm doing? And then ultimately, without being attached to the outcome, have some perspective and know that it's really about the journey. So let's chart our courses. Let's be up to stuff that inspires us and be kind to ourselves and others along the way. All right. Thanks for listening and watching. Make sure to hit the follow or the subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. Take a look in the show notes for ways to connect with me on social media. I did put a few links in the show notes to old podcasts and blog post articles about the sort of year-end, New Year completion creation process if you're interested in that. And if you want to learn more about me and my work, the best place to do that is at our website, which is mike-robbins.com. Until next time, keep bringing your whole self to work, to life. And remember, we're all in this thing together.